Many have called the last few decades an oil war in geopolitics. We have entered an era in which the oil war has risen to a new alarming level, and we can now call it the total energy war, which deeply affects the entire population of our planet. The tools and strategies used by the leading participants in the war at this new level create unprecedented problems in the economy and society. The covert destruction of the Nord Stream gas pipelines marked a new point in history that could change the entire world forever. And we may never know which leaders were really in this deep turmoil to bring the world to this troubling point in history. And it is apparently difficult for Western authorities to reveal the truth about what they found at Nord Stream. Why? 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 Why?
Heading into the Baltic Sea, we're on our way to a crime scene. The site of suspected sabotage. An alleged attack on Nord Stream, the biggest underwater gas pipeline from Russia to Europe.
What does that mean? Skull and crossbones?
That is the leak.
That's the leak?
That is the leak.
So ahead of us is an exclusion zone of around 9 kilometres wide, and that's as close as we're allowed to get. It's only the military and investigators who are allowed any closer to those gas leaks as they try to protect the evidence and find out what happened here and who's responsible.
All summer we asked if Europe was ready for winter. Now, is Europe ready for hybrid warfare? Swedish authorities reporting a fourth leak on the Nord Stream pipelines that connect Russia to Germany via the Baltic Sea. The EU calls Monday's explosions sabotage. Poland and Ukraine blame Russia. Moscow asks, why would we do billions in damage to our own pipelines? 4 days on, we're still asking who done it and why.
NATO officially blaming sabotage for the series of leaks in the Nord Stream pipelines that carry natural gas from Russia to Germany.
Tonight, sabotage at sea. That's what President Biden is calling the leaks and explosions on the Nord Stream pipelines.
Blown up and leaking tons of methane into the atmosphere. The U.S. calling this a deliberate act of sabotage, while NATO threatens to retaliate. Our next guest wrote the book on Putin's playbook and says all signs point to Russia. All signs point to Russia, to Russia, to Russia, to Russia, to Russia, to Russia.
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
As if stretching a pipeline across the Baltic Sea weren't difficult enough, a new EU ruling makes it even harder. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline belongs to Russian energy monolith Gazprom, as does the gas it will transport. But a new EU law bans the pipeline's owner from also supplying the gas. With one exception, if Nord Stream 2 had been completed early this year, the law wouldn't apply. It won't be finished until 2020, though. So, is Nord Stream 2 over? Germany wants to prevent that.
All right, if Berlin eventually manages to get that new law through, will it solve the controversy?
That will definitely not leave this issue without further problems. Of course, there is still a lot of objection, particularly not only from the EU but also from the US. Washington previously said that Germany would be a hostage to Russia if this pipeline went ahead. And of course, there are also the concerns of countries like Poland and Ukraine as well about what potential problems they might face once this pipeline possibly comes into action next year.
All right, Kay Brady there reporting for us on the Nord Stream 2 controversy.
For the same reason, the US is also fiercely against the project. They want to see it used by Europe to pressure Russia and not the other way around.
Gas is not flowing through Nord Stream 2 yet, which means that the pipeline is leverage for Germany, the United States, and our allies, not Russia.
Nord Stream 2 was completed last year, but is awaiting certification from Germany, a process that has been temporarily halted over Europe's fair competition rules. The European Commission opposes the Nord Stream 2, concerned that it further increases energy reliance on Russia, which already supplies 40% of the EU's natural gas. Germany continues to stand behind the Nord Stream 2, but has suggested that halting it would be on the table if Russia attacks Ukraine.
It is clear that there will be a high price to pay, and that everything will have to be discussed should there be a military intervention in Ukraine.
Prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there were 82 surface ships and 11 NATO submarines in the Baltic. But after Sweden and Finland announced their entry into the alliance, 5 submarines, 9 corvettes, 12 patrol boats, and 20 minesweepers of the Swedish Navy, and 6 mine layers, 8 patrol ships, and 13 minesweepers of Finland were added to the composition. Now the entire water area of the Baltic Sea, with the exception of a small part of the Gulf of Finland, is under the complete control of the alliance. The drills are going on all the time, even while you're watching this video.
Take you back to that breaking news we've been monitoring for the last 40 minutes now or so. It's been burning here. This big fire you see there in the middle of your screen, it's on the river. And you can see that black smoke still billowing into the sky. According to authorities, we have a little more information for you that it's a vessel that hit a gas line in Lake Leary.
Breaking news tonight, a pipeline fire is burning in Lower St. Bernard Parish.
WGNO's LBJ is near Lake Leary with the latest. LBJ, what can you show us?
Yeah, Susie and Kurt, the Delacroix Highway is where we are. And yes, just over my shoulder, you see that pipeline fire burning. We spoke earlier to Parish President Guy McGinnis, who sort of gave us this bit of information that it's been burning for a couple of hours now. He identified it as a gas pipeline explosion in Lake Leary. As you see, the authorities from the St. Bernard Parish Sheriff's Office drive by in their boat right there. Also, officials from the St. Bernard Parish Fire Department down here. The operator of this gas well is waiting for it to burn off. It's going to take some time, according to the parish president, to burn off. It's going to take quite a while. He has not named the operator. There are no reports of any injuries currently. He did go on to say, however, that a small sheen has formed in the water just north of where that site is, that a small sheen of oil or debris or whatever is in the water just north of where that site is. Again, the Sheriff's Office boats and the fire department are on the scene, awaiting the Coast Guard as well. There was a report that a barge, a loose barge, actually hit the pipeline. The parish president categorically denies that. He says that there were fishermen working in Lake Leary who did see no signs of a barge that hit a pipeline, that the pipeline exploded. There is no The investigation is not complete just yet, and they don't know why it exploded. 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 It
Russia has submarines that can become invisible to NATO and can perform special underwater tasks. However, it is highly questionable whether Russia would use such a submarine in the Baltic Sea for destroying one of its most valuable infrastructures, in a sea that is strictly monitored by NATO. Instead of using a few $100 million submarine to explode something underwater, special forces use much cheaper and useful drones like the Sea Fox drone or the Barracuda neutralizer. The US and NATO also use these tools. An unmanned surface vehicle reaches the target area to begin the operation. An AQ-S-20 sonar deploys from the vehicle and begins sonar search. The Barracuda mine neutralizer deployed from the unmanned surface vehicle. Mission downloaded and Barracuda neutralizer release authorized. The Barracuda acquires target and begins position keeping. The Barracuda operator confirms target and authorizes neutralization. On September 22, 2022, it was published on NATO's official website that NATO will hold a military exercise with the participation of 10 member countries in the Baltic Sea region on September 26 to 27, the very day of the explosion of the Nord Stream gas pipelines and the day after. Combining air defense and ground military exercises, the exercises take place over 2 days. The statement says, allies Hungary, Germany, Czech Republic, Italy, Turkey, United Kingdom, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania as well as partner Finland, will conduct the third Ramstein alloy exercise in 2022 with a focus on NATO's deterrent event concept. So, not only is the Baltic Sea, which is surrounded by 8 NATO countries, constantly under full NATO surveillance and readiness, but even on the day of the Nord Stream explosion, 10 NATO countries held military exercises in the area.
Well, probably parallel. If they were on the surface, we would definitely see faces.
At this distance, the Russians are bound to hear Northumberland and know they've been rumbled.
The question is, knowing this, how logical is the narrative repeated in the mass media that Putin and Russia somehow went there that very day and blew up the Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipelines in total secrecy? One day before the Nord Stream detonation, Scotland's Aberdeen Lad website reported that HMS Northumberland, Royal Navy warship, leaves Aberdeen for Baltic Sea amid heightened Russia tensions. The ship is now due to take part in exercises on Russia's doorstep after spending time in the northeast. One day before the Baltic Sea military exercise and the explosion of the Nord Stream, a British warship specializing in submarines left for the Baltic Sea. This only highlights the question that if Russia had blown up the Nord Stream, how is it possible that NATO would not have noticed it? As we can see, such underwater explosions can be carried out with relatively small devices. It is not necessary at all to use the world's largest nuclear submarines for this task, the use of which is very doubtful in the Baltic Sea anyway, where NATO exercises full supervision every minute. The deployment of the Barracuda neutralizer and system is also possible using helicopters, even using a self-propelled, unmanned smaller vessel, officially called Common Unmanned Surface Vessel, CUSV. What used to take weeks or months will soon be done in a matter of days or hours, said Randy Brandenburg in 2019, the Sea Power Business Development Executive at Raytheon. The biggest client of Raytheon is of course the United States, then other governments via the US. Knowing this, it is easy to see that while Russia's implementation of such a secret sabotage operation in the Baltic Sea may involve quite a lot of complications, under the full supervision of the navies of the NATO countries. On the other hand, carrying out such an action by NATO countries in the Baltic Sea is child's play. If we add to this the fact that such sabotage in the Baltic Sea is only investigated by the authorities of NATO countries, then it is also easy to see that it would never be revealed that the explosion of the Nord Stream was possibly a joint action of the United States and NATO countries. For the latter reasons, it is easy to understand that there is probably not much chance of actually finding out the truth about who committed this historically significant destruction in the depths of the Baltic Sea. How can anyone know the truth about this?
Check, sir?
Yes.
And cash.
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 Which was traced.
Traced.
The
Yes,
checks.
sir.
Follow the money.
What do you mean?
Where? Oh, I can't tell you that.
Many people have already repeated in the mass media that the Nord Stream gas pipelines cost many billions of dollars. Nevertheless, the true value of Nord Stream can only be measured and understood in the order of trillions of dollars. The Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline transported nearly 60 billion cubic meters of gas to Europe in 2021. The 2 Nord Stream gas pipelines are capable of delivering almost 120 billion cubic meters, which means that, calculated at today's prices, it can generate an income of $200 billion. These gas pipelines are designed for 50 years of operation. Thus, even with the lowest figures, the business value of Nord Stream is over $1 trillion. In order to understand this business value, you need to know that the business value of Tesla, the car manufacturer, is currently $690 billion, and that Nord Stream is worth almost twice as much. Destroying it would be of a similar order of magnitude, as if someone were to destroy the Tesla company in one day, along with all its car factories in the world, all its technology, and all its cars in storage and in dealerships. Or it's like someone can destroy Google in one day, which is worth $1.3 trillion now. This is how the business value represented by Nord Stream can be understood. Furthermore, it is also understandable who would have liked the Nord Stream not to exist in the first place, and how large-scale business interests could have motivated the people who might have ordered the Nord Stream to be blown up. It is only one side of this event that someone or some people caused an economic damage of more than $1 trillion to Russia, which is a huge amount that almost reaches the entire one-year GDP of Russia. And this damage is a significant and celebratory damage to a certain side, to certain people, but not at all for Russia.
And ultimately, this is also a tremendous opportunity.
The other side is that this has also created a business opportunity of the same magnitude for certain states and companies, as time has been turned back to the point when Nord Stream did not even exist, to the state before 2011, which makes it possible to renegotiate the entire gas delivery with European countries. Immediate applicants for this business have been known for years.
That long-term commitment is vital for companies like Cheniere, whose multi-billion-dollar facilities typically require up to 20 years of guaranteed contracts to see a return on investment. And though Europe is the priority market now, the future of American LNG may well be tied to another continent entirely.
Knowing these, it is completely impossible to claim that no one here derived a very significant benefit from the destruction of the Nord Stream, or to claim that the United States had no motivation for this act.
But if it is confirmed, that's clearly in no one's interest.
By understanding the incredible business value of Nord Stream, it is also understandable why the narrative in theory that Putin destroyed the Nord Stream gas pipelines, causing himself and Russia more than $1 trillion worth of damage in one day, does not seem very realistic. Many things may be characteristic of Putin, but this type and degree of damage to his own economic interests and his own country is not at all. The economic value of the Nord Stream is of such magnitude that Russia could have covered its entire military budget for 20 years, for example. Based on this alone, it is completely inconceivable that Putin would think of such a large economic damage to himself. It is also almost unthinkable for countries at war to cause such economic damage to themselves.
All signs point to Russia. All signs point to Russia, 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 point to Russia.
Is President Putin. And I have no rational explanation.
And I do not, there is no rationality here. He is motivated by some crazy ideas. I want to really emphasize that.
Putin is not sufficiently weakened, at least as yet, to be motivated to come to a rational settlement.
So I think it's a bit more than irrational, shall we say. I think we've all done in life some irrational acts, but this is beyond irrational.
Several people in the mass media have spread the word that Putin is irrational, and that is why he probably blew up the Nord Stream. That seems like a pretty great and simple explanation. But is this really true? These types and levels of explanations are only good for gaslighting people. Putin's alleged irrationality can be summed up in two things. One, Putin and Russia are harming their enemies, but not themselves. Two, Putin and Russia do this openly. It is understandable that the enemies of Putin and Russia call this irrational, while this is the basic point of view of the leader of any country, who considers his country the most important thing.
And we all know what Putin is doing to Ukrainian cities right now.
Russian sabotage. Russian sabotage.
What's happening here is Russian sabotage.
Sabotage by the Russians.
Sabotage by the Russians.
More stable rhetoric, more intimidation from the Russians.
It certainly is.
While NATO does not call out Russia by name for being behind the attack.
Looks like it could have had Russia behind it.
Looks like it was a Russian attack. The attack is right out of Putin's playbook.
Putin's playbook. Putin's playbook. Sabotage sounds very part of his playbook. Part of his playbook. Part of his playbook. Part of his playbook.
Yes, we all know what Russia is doing. But do we know what the USA, NATO, and EU countries are doing? Not really, as they openly do not dare to commit acts of this magnitude, such as blowing up civilian infrastructure owned by another country in the Baltic Sea. Obviously, the USA and NATO countries do not dare to do such a thing. But would they still do it in complete secrecy? A lot of people would agree that Russia would do this sort of thing in the open. There's no reason for them to do it secretly, or even to be secretive about it, because everyone would be saying, oh, the Russians, they blew up their own gas pipeline and then what? We knew that Putin is like that, isn't he? Moreover, Russia, if it had done this itself, was able to do so in a NATO-controlled area without the NATO Navy apparently noticing. Russia would have absolutely no interest in keeping something like this a secret. The question is, however, who has a much greater motivation for covert activity and to remain silent about it? For example, blowing up gas pipelines that could deliver natural gas to tens of millions of people would be such a bad and evil act by someone else that for some countries, it must be a covert operation. Some countries cannot openly do these deeply reprehensible things. But if we all know what Russia is doing anyway, since they're apparently doing it overtly then, who has the motivation to covertly do amazingly nefarious things? This is the main question in this thread. It is not only that the Nord Stream pipeline incident has a very important historical aspect, as the most valuable civilian infrastructure was sabotaged and destroyed by a country or countries. But what is important about this issue is that it was secretly carried out by a military power or a military committed by an alliance. This raises another important question. Why was this a covert operation? And why did no one take responsibility? And why does it have to be kept secret forever? Why do they know anything about this, and why should they keep quiet about it? Is this the first time in history that a country has blown up another country's natural gas pipeline in a covert operation? In an article published by the Washington Post in 2004, it describes how the United States blew up a Russian gas pipeline in Siberia in a secret operation. This article was published at a time when the cancel culture, built by the West since then, did not yet exist. Therefore, such a story was not received by the readers of that time as they would receive it now. The Washington Post article described the story as follows. In January 1982, President Ronald Reagan approved a CIA plan to sabotage the economy of the Soviet Union through covert transfers of technology that contained hidden malfunctions, including software that later triggered a huge explosion in a Siberian natural gas pipeline, according to a new memoir by a Reagan White House official. Thomas C. Reed, a former Air Force secretary who was serving in the National Security Council at the time, describes the episode in At the Abyss, an insider's history of the Cold War, to be published next month by Ballantine Books. Reed writes that the pipeline explosion was just one example of cold-eyed economic warfare against the Soviet Union that the CIA carried out under Director William J. Casey during the final years of the Cold War. At the time, the United States was attempting to block Western Europe from importing Soviet natural gas. There were also signs that the Soviets were trying to steal a wide variety of Western technology. Then a KGB insider revealed a specific shopping list, and the CIA slipped the flawed software to the Soviets in a way they would not detect it. In order to disrupt the Soviet gas supply, its hard currency earnings from the West, and the internal Russian economy, the pipeline software that was to run the pumps, turbines, and valves was programmed to go haywire after a decent interval, to reset pump speeds and valve settings to produce pressures far beyond those acceptable to pipeline joints and welds. Reed writes, "The result was the most monumental non-nuclear explosion and fire ever seen from space," he recalls, adding that U.S. satellites picked up the explosion. Reed said in an interview that the blast occurred in the summer of 1982. While there were no physical casualties from the pipeline explosion, there was significant damage to the Soviet economy, he writes. We can see that in the case of the Nord Stream sabotage, the perpetrators had a much easier time than in the Siberian operation at the time, and the current perpetrators do not seem to be as brilliant as the planners and executors of the original sabotage that preceded them in history, from whom they could have learned this pattern. There are countries on Earth where this level of covert destruction without any limits has been part of their normal operation for decades, and people don't really know about it or don't really want to know about it. And the Western propaganda mass media network, which works at an amazing pace and extent, now hides these facts rather than showing people the truth. This is illustrated by the story of the explosion of the Nord Stream in the dark of the Baltic Sea. Knowing the last year or so, you can see that if Russia wants to cause any kind of destruction, they do it not covertly but openly. It can be seen and they take responsibility, even if the West blames them every time, every day. If Russia wanted to destroy its own gas pipeline, they could have done it either inside Russia, because the Nord Stream pipelines have quite large parts in Russia, so they don't have to go to the Baltic Sea and destroy gas pipelines there, where the NATO military presence and control is very strong. Or if it did, Russia would have done so openly, and even undertakes to do so. Why not? We are talking about self-built gas pipelines here. Russia would have just openly destroyed it anywhere if that was its goal. They wouldn't have lost anything by doing it openly, since the Western media had already humiliated them on every possible level. And the pipelines are almost completely closed by Russia anyway. So we can see that for Russia, the covert destruction of its own pipeline is worthless, and they cannot successfully blame others for this, since they do not have sufficient control over the Western media. Therefore, what exactly does Russia gain if someone secretly destroys Nord Stream? Nothing really. What does the West gain? This can only be a poetic question now. But let's wait a bit. Say several people who try to explain the Nord Stream incident with the justification in the tabloids that Putin and Russia just want to freeze Europe, which is why they destroyed the Nord Stream. The only problem with this explanation is that if it were really true, then Putin and Russia would have destroyed the new Norwegian Polish gas pipeline too, in the Baltic Sea, that was inaugurated on that very day, which passes under the sea in almost the same place as the Nord Stream gas pipelines. Furthermore, Russia would have destroyed the Turkish gas pipeline too, which transported 30 billion cubic meters of gas to Europe. Putin also would not have initiated negotiations with Turkey in the past few days on the construction of a brand new gas pipeline and gas distribution center in Turkey, which will transport gas to Europe on a similar scale as the capacity of Nord Stream.
We might consider the perspective of building yet another gas pipeline system and creating a gas hub in Turkey for sales to other countries. First of all, of course, European countries. Only, of course, if they are interested.
It may be just an incidentally important question. What they will do against President Erdogan and Turkey, just to prevent the establishment of a new gas pipeline and gas distribution center in Turkey. The first events are already visible in this regard. It can be seen that in the Western mainstream media, they are trying to run quite unbelievable explanations about the Nord Stream explosions. And they are trying to avoid the really important questions about this very serious and significant economic destruction. The destruction of the Nord Stream took place in a non-inhabited and non-war zone, and the motivation behind its destruction is much older than the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Of course, it can easily be connected to the Russian-Ukrainian fights, and thus the truth can be easily covered up. But basically, it is part of an energy war that has been going on for a much longer time. The story of Nord Stream is not just an ordinary sordid story. This is a much more serious event, about which no one can yet know for sure where it will lead, as the perpetrators have opened a new door that has not been opened until now, perhaps only a crack. It is an incredibly large amount of damage not only to Russia, but also to Europe, while many Europeans could not yet recognize the weight of this for the future. The fact that a large part of public opinion is shaped through the mass media in such a way that many people just wave at this story and say, "Oh, the Russians deserved it," can only be okay in a completely twisted society. A lot of people don't think that this road leads to a place where the majority of the world just winks at September 11 and says, "Oh, the Americans deserved it." We can see where we are going if this becomes completely natural in the world. And in the mass media, the leaders of countries say about such things that, and ultimately, this is a tremendous opportunity. We can see at what level this is an aberrant way of thinking in relation to such an event. Nord Stream is the symbol of this kind of completely twisted thinking today. And unfortunately, it is terrible to even think that the people hiding in the background, who are the planners and perpetrators of this event, could be working on an even more vile plan. In addition, they lie to many billions of people around the world every day through the mass media, just to cover up their activities even more and to shift the blame onto others. And we will bear the consequences of their vile, secretly committed, completely irresponsible actions.